Welcome to the African Weekly Roundup, a weekly program every Sunday here on HORUFADHI Media, where I discuss the latest news and events across the African continent. I'm Sudan Mohammed, your host and producer here on HORUFADHI Media. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media. Also, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group's second channel, known as HORUFADHI TV, where you can find other exclusive programs such as Behind the Scenes and Mhahi Salah, among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sudan Mohammed, Suleiman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider HORUFADHI Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into the headlines. And we kick off in Northern Africa, where at least 29 migrants from sub-Saharan Africa died when their two boats sank off the coast of Tunisia as they tried to cross the Mediterranean Sea to Italy, the Tunisian Coast Guard said on Sunday. Separately, in the last 4 days, 5 migrant boats have sunk off the coast of the southern city of Sfax, leaving 67 missing and 9 dead after a significant increase in boats heading towards Italy. Tunisia has taken over from Libya as a main departure point for people fleeing poverty and conflict in Africa and the Middle East in the hope of a better life in Europe. Hussein Jababli, a senior official in the National Guard, told Reuters news agency that the Tunisian Coast Guard had also rescued 11 people off the coast of Mahdia, further north. The Coast Guard said it had stopped about 80 boats heading for Italy in the past 4 days and detained more than 3,000 migrants, mostly from sub-Saharan Africa. The latest loss of life comes in the midst of a campaign of arrests by the Tunisian authorities of undocumented sub-Saharan Africans. According to UN data, at least 12,000 migrants have reached Italy this year, set sail from Tunisia, compared to 1,300 in the same period of 2012. According to 2022, that is, sorry. Now, according to statistics from Tunisian Forum for Social and Economic Rights, Tunisia's Coast Guard prevented more than 14,000 migrants setting off in boats during the first 3 months of 2023 alone, compared to 2,900 during the same period in 2022. That is nearly 7 times, almost, the amount that went from last year compared to this year. Now, the Italian Coast Guard said on Thursday it had rescued about 750 migrants in 2 operations off the Italian southern coast. Europe risks seeing a huge wave of migrants arriving on its shores from northern Africa if financial stability in Tunisia is not safeguarded, Italian Prime Minister said on Friday. Meloni, Italian's Prime Minister, called on the IMF and some countries to help Tunisia quickly to avoid its collapse. Now, separately, at least 60 people have died, including 12 children, when a wooden sailing boat carrying migrants to Europe crashed against rocks near the southern Italian coast early on Sunday. Now, vessels which sailed from Turkey was carrying people from Afghanistan, Iran, and several other countries sank in rough seas before dawn near Staccato di Cutro, a seaside resort on the eastern coast of Calabria. The incident reopened a debate on migration in Europe and Italy, where the recent elected right-wing government's tough new laws for migrant rescue charities had drawn criticism from the UN and others. Now, Manila Kura, a provincial government official, told news agencies that 81 people had survived the shipwreck. 20 of them were hospitalized, including one person in intensive care. Now, the Interior Minister of Italy, who traveled to the scene, said 20 to 30 people might still be missing amid reports from survivors that the boat had been carrying between 150 to 200 migrants. Now, the vessel set sail from the western Turkish port of Izmir about 4 days ago and was spotted about 74 kilometers off the Italian coast late on Saturday by a plane operated by the European Union border agency Frontex, Italian police said. Now, the patrol boats were sent to intercept it, but severe weather forced them to return to port, police said, adding that authorities then mobilized search units along the coastline. A baby aged only a few months was among those found washed up on the beach, ANSA news agency said. Now, emergency doctor Laura De Paoli described finding another dead child aged 7. When we got to the point of the shipwreck, we saw corpses floating everywhere, and we rescued 2 men who were holding up a child. Sadly, the little one died, she told the news agency. Now, wreckage from the wooden gullet, a Turkish sailing boat, was seen across a large stretch of the coast. One survivor was arrested in the migrant trafficking charges, the Guardia di Finanza, a custom police officer, said. Now, Italian Prime Minister expressed deep sorrow for the deaths and blamed human traffickers who profit while offering migrants the false prospect of a safe journey. The government is committed to preventing departures and with them the unfolding of these tragedies. and we will continue to do so, first of all by calling for maximum cooperation from the countries of the departure and origin, she said. Now, Maloney's administration has said migrant rescue charities are encouraging migrants to make their dangerous sea journey to Italy and sometimes work in partnership with traffickers. Now, these charities have strongly denied these accusations. However, the coast of Calabria has not been patrolled by NGO ships which operate in the waters of South Sicily. This suggests that they would have been unlikely to intercept the shipwreckage migrants regardless of Maloney's crackdown. Now, the head of Italian's Catholic Church, Cardinal Matteo Zuppi, called for the resumption of an EU search and rescue mission in the Mediterranean as part of a structural, shared and humanitarian response to the migration crisis. Now, a spokesman for the UN's International Organization for Migration, or IOM, in the same vein appealed on Twitter for the strengthening of rescue operations in the Mediterranean Sea. Now, early on Sunday, Pope Francis, the son of Italian migrants to Argentina and a long vocal advocate for migrant rights, said he was praying for the shipwreck's victims. Italy is one of the main landing points for migrants trying to enter Europe by sea, with many seeking to travel on to richer northern European nations. But to do so, they must brave the world's most dangerous migration route. The UN's Missing Migrants Project has registered more than 20,000 deaths and disappearances in the central Mediterranean since 2014, and more than 220 have died or disappeared this year, it estimates. Now, over to West Africa, where the Chaldean government has nationalized all assets and rights, including hydrocarbon permits and exploration, as well as production authorization, that belong to a subsidiary of ExxonMobil, the West African nation's energy and hydrocarbons ministry said in a statement on Thursday. Now, ExxonMobil said in December 2022 that it had closed the sale of its operations in Chad and Cameroon to London-listed Savannah Energy in a $407 million deal, but the Chaldean government contested the agreement, saying the final terms were different from what had been presented to it. Now, the government warned then that it may ask courts to block Savannah's purchase of Exxon's assets in the country and take further steps to protect its interests. Now, Exxon's assets included a 40% stake in Chad's Doba oil project, which comprises 7 producing oil fields with combined output of 28,000 barrels per day. It also included Exxon's interest in more than 1,000 kilometers of Chad-Cameroon pipeline from the landlocked nation to the Atlantic Gulf of Guinea coast, through which its crude is exported. But on Friday, Savannah said it had plans to pursue all its legal rights to contest Chad's move, a day early to nationalize its upstream assets in the African country. The actions of the Republic of Chad are in direct breach of the conventions to which SCI and the Republic of Chad are, amongst other, party, its statement read. The conventions are subject to the jurisdiction of an ICC tribunal seated in Paris, and the company intends to pursue all of its legal rights. Chad, which has the 10th largest reserves in Africa, exports 90% of its oil. Now, moving over to Eastern Africa, where 4 Kenyan members of parliament were charged on Thursday with unlawful assembly for taking part this week in protests against President William Ruto's government over high cost of living, their lawyers said. 1 person was killed and more than 200 were arrested during Monday's nationwide demonstrations called by opposition leader Raila Odinga. The lawmakers, who included the leaders of Odinga's faction in both houses of parliament, were arrested and then released on bail after being charged in a Nairobi court, their lawyer Danstan Omari said. Speaking to the media on Thursday, Odinga demanded their release. He also warned the threats by Kenya's communication regulator to revoke the licenses of 6 TV stations over coverage of the demonstrations amounted to censorship. On Monday, the stations carried live footage of several hours, including images of police firing tear gas and water cannons at Odinga's convoy. The coverage depicted scenes that could cause panic or incitement to the public, threatening peace and cohesion in the country, the Communication Authority of Kenya said in a statement on late Wednesday. It added that failure by broadcasters to adhere to legal obligations could lead to revocation of their license or frequency. Odinga has called for twice-weekly protests against the government, citing the high cost of staples such as maize flour, which has kept inflation high. He also accused President Ruto of cheating in last year's presidential election, the 5th in a row in which Odinga's finished runner-up. Odinga unsuccessfully challenged the result last year before the Supreme Court. Now, over to Northern Africa, where Sudan's military and civilian political leaders began talks on Sunday on a proposal to bring the powerful paramilitary Rapid Support Force, or RSF, under the army's control as they try to finalize an agreement for a new transition leading to elections. Integrating the RSF and placing the military under civilian authority are central demands of the civilian groups that helped overthrow longtime autocratic leader Omar al-Bashir 4 years ago and shared power with the military until an October 2021 coup. Now, talks this week follow a framework deal agreed in December between the Military and Civilian Forces for Freedom and Change, or FFC, alliance, which aims to turn the coup which led to mass protests and cut the Sudan off from much of the international financial support. Sudan's army has a long history of staging military takeovers and has amassed substantial economic holdings. It wants to see the RSF, which by some estimates has up to 100,000 fighters integrated under its control. The two sides are expected to formally adopt the deal on April 6th and launch a new civilian government on April 11th. The agreement had left several sensitive issues, including the security reform and transitional justice, for further discussion. Now, power jostling between the head of the RSF, Mohamed Hamadan Dagalo, and Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, along with uncertainty over how and when the RSF could be merged with the army, has been a source of recent tension. Dagalo has put himself at the forefront of the planned transition toward democracy, unsettling fellow military rulers and triggering mobilization of troops in the capital Khartoum in recent weeks. The process of security and military reform is not as easy, but it is important, and our goal is a single army, Dagalo said at a launch of the talks on Sunday, adding that the RSF would not abandon the choice of democratic transformation. Dagalo, widely known as Hemeti, is the deputy leader of the ruling council that took full power after the 2021 coup. Now, this council's head, asserted on Sunday that the country's army would be brought under the leadership of a new civilian government, restating pledges that it would withdraw from politics. The process of security and military reform is a long and complicated process, and one that cannot be bypassed, said President Burhan. Now, over to Mali, where Malian authorities have questioned the credibility of a UN report that claimed a significant increase in the number of people killed in 2022 and blamed more than a third of human rights violations on the army. Bamako said the report, published Wednesday by the UN's Mali mission, used documents published by state and non-state organizations and interviews conducted remotely to verify some of the details. This approach raises questions about the credibility of all information gathered, it said. Now, the UN mission in Mali said 1,277 people were killed in Mali in 2022, more than double the previous year, which was 584. It also attributed 35% of human rights violations to security forces, which were sometimes accompanied by foreign military personnel. And the statement did not go into detail what these foreign military or who these foreign military personnel are, but many assume that they're referring to the Russian Wagner Group. Now, these figures do not include violations committed in Mora, which in late March 2022, there was what Human Rights Watch has described as a massacre of 300 civilians by Malian soldiers associated with foreign troops, allegedly. Now, the Malian army denies this and claims it eliminated over 200 jihadis and not 300 civilians. A UN report on these alleged abuses has not yet been released. Now, Mali's military junta that has ruled the country in 2022 began working with what it called Russian instructors. Opponents say these are mercenaries from the Wagner Group. In February, the head of the UN mission's Human Rights Division was expelled from Mali. And those are the top stories on the program this week. Please tune in next week for headlines across the African continent.